Hello everybody and welcome to the Gran Fondo National Series Championship Sunday. We're very pleased to bring you this very first E-Fondo Championship event that's being hosted on the RGT Cycling platform. We have several riders today who have qualified for today's championship event through one of the 8 qualifying races that have been taking place over the previous 4 months. These have been hosted on the platform and they mimic the real life courses that riders can go and peruse in the real world and enter and compete. And because of the world situation, there's been a great opportunity for the Gran Fondo National Series to embrace this new way of riding on the RGT platform. So today we will cover the very unique format from the Gran Fondo Series, and instead of being a point race from start to finish, this event covers several time segments on the course, and we'll get into that. And by now each of the riders, they should be used to that format because it is a little bit of a different way of riding. So you can see on the screen there, these are the 8 qualifying events that have occurred. We started off in Florida, then it was on to Georgia, the Highlands E-Fondo, the Asheville Fondo, which is also the course for today. So those riders that competed in that event, they've already had an insight in today's course. They might have a little bit of an advantage over those other riders who may have done one of these other Fondos. There was also the Boone Fondo, Golden, Maryland, and then the Gen Z Fondo, which wrapped up the 8 qualifying events last Sunday. So each of these events are based on a real world course, and there will be opportunities for riders to get back out there this year after what was a terrible year last year. And we will be riding today, as I just mentioned, on the Asheville course. So this starts in Asheville, North Carolina, and it loops out from the city, out in a loop, and then finishes up in the mountains with a little bit of a climb at the end. And as you can see at the bottom there you can see the profile. And today's course is 31.5 miles in total, and there's 3,500 feet of climbing within that distance. And you can see on that little profile there, there's 4 red sections. Now each of those red sections, that is where you will be really needing to put the hammer down. That's where you're going to be getting your time segments, and the cumulative time of those 4 segments, that gives you an overall time, and that's how we determine who the winner is of today's event. So it's not a case of just hearing that gunfire and off you go fast as you can to the finish line. It's quite tactical. You want to get into a decent sized group. You don't want to be riding solo. You want to take advantage of that pack. And even if you're not in the front group, you could be in the second group, which could be twice as big and therefore moving a little bit quicker. And it gives you a bit more chance to rest and relax. And also between the different time segments as well, you don't have to go gunning the whole distance. You can have a little bit of a breather, ease up, slow down, get your breath back, and then hit the next time segment from the beginning and push it hard again. So we're going to be focusing on each of those time segments today. It's nice and clear on the screen when those are coming up. Each one varies in length. So the first one, we've got a nice easy roll in today. So the first one starts in 2.6 miles into the event. So there's no need for riders to be steaming straight out from the gun. Hopefully they'll be a little bit relaxed, but knowing how e-racing works, we shall see how that turns out, because they usually are fast starts. And if you're new to e-cycling and e-racing, then we'll go through some of the nuances of racing online, and we'll talk through some of the dynamics of the platform and also explain some of the graphics that you see on the screen so that you can understand what you're seeing. Obviously, it's very different to riding in the real world where you don't have any of this sort of heads-up display. So we'll go through that and hopefully bring you up to speed. So the first segment, that's 2.8 miles long, and then we have a second segment which is 2.5 miles, a third segment which is 4 miles, and then the final segment comes right at the end, and that's a 6-mile climb. So that's where the majority of today's climbing will be, and I imagine that's where we will be deciding who our winners will be. That's where the champions will be made. So all of this has been made possible thanks to some generous sponsors. So Colnago is the headline sponsor of the Gran Fondo National Series, And we've also got some raffle prizes on offer today, which are being provided by Hyperice and also the Garda Bike Hotel in Italy. So thanks a lot to the sponsors who have put those raffle prizes up, and all the riders today will be in with a chance of winning one of those prizes no matter what their final position is. So that's a great reward for these riders who have done at least one event already. So the qualification criteria include winning or finishing in the top 3, not just winning, being on the podium in one of the qualifying events, being in the top 25% of your age group, or competing in 2 of the previous events. So yeah, some really good prizes there. You can see we've got some massage devices, some Hyperice boots, which help with the recovery, and then a 3-night stay at the Garda Bike Hotel, which is a beautiful part of the world. And all of these these virtual results, they will lead through to real world fondos that are happening this year across America. So get out there and please support the Gran Fondo National Series. They put on a series of 8 events which are coming up across in 2021, and each of these will be a little bit longer than the virtual events. The virtual events tend to be a little bit shorter just because time indoors on the trainer isn't quite as fun as being outdoors. But you can see here we're just showcasing where these are right across the United States. Some on the East Coast here, North, South, and then Central, and then the Gen-Z Gran Fondo out in San Francisco. And then it all culminates, like we are today, in Asheville, North Carolina. So all the details for those are on the GranFondoNationalSeries.com website. So get over there, have a little look, and sign up for one of these great events. So we're going to cut across now to the start line. We've literally got 10 seconds before the start of the race, and we are going to see the gun go, and these riders, I'm sure, will actually just zoom straight off the start line, despite the first time segment not being until 2.5 miles in. So there's the fly past, these riders are away. Here they go then. Good to see them all getting away nice and cleanly. So there will be a few familiar names here for those riders who are familiar with the platform and those who have given it a go. There's, you can see Mark Rowbottom there on the screen. He's one of the Ratio Racing riders. We can see Ryan Vince there at the bottom there in the dirt jersey. So that's one of the online clubs. Several riders in the Gran Fondo National Series jersey there. So that's the blue with the red and white bands on there. Good to see them supporting the event organisers by showing the colours. So as you can see on the screen, there's quite a lot of information there, and this is what the riders will see when they are riding along. So we'll start off on the left hand side. You've got your leaderboard there, those names jumping around with the different riders as they're in this peloton, which isn't going along too quickly. We're at 30, well actually say that is fairly quick, 30 miles an hour at these initial stages. Already nearly a mile into the event, and that first sector is coming up in 2.6 miles. So here we are then, down in the bunch, nice big bunch, all still together. And because of these time segments, you do get a little bit of cat and mouse before the banner on the road. And that's because you want to be last one into the segment, but first one out of the segment. And that's the way you get the shortest time. So there's a little bit of cat and mouse. You can see these riders at the back here. So Mark Rowbottom there, he's just hanging on at the back because he knows that if he crosses last, and then he can gain up a few seconds on the rest of the field. And it could be pretty tight today. And that's all of these riders, they've had the experience of doing one event. So they do know the tactics. They do know the best way to ride these courses. And they're all going to be looking for as much of an advantage as they can. And because this is a virtual event, there are 4 time slots today as well. So we had an earlier running of the event. We're obviously covering this event now, and then there's a couple more to come today as well. So there's these riders, they can't be slacking off. They can't be thinking, oh, we're just looking at each other in this group. You're racing against every time slot. So there's a need still for these riders to push on through those time segments as hard as they can. It's not just about beating the people on the road in this event, it's about beating the people in the other timed events too. So nice big pack here then. Currently we've got a pretty consistent group of one, big bunch, but that might start to split as we hit some of the climbs. The initial part of the course is pretty steady. There's a little bit of downhill. You can see in the top right hand corner there's a circle there which says -0.6, and it's got a green semicircle underneath, and that's because that's the current gradient. So we're slightly downhill as indicated by the negative symbol in front of that, and the green, that will change colour as the gradient changes as well. So as it gets steeper it starts to turn to a lime green, a yellow, orange, and then a dark red the steeper it gets. So for the riders, seeing that as a green, that's when they're comfortable. And you can just see in that top right hand corner now there's a few little white dots. That's indicating the position of the riders on the course, and there's a green dot just coming up, and that indicates the start of the first time segment. So we're about half a mile, quarter of a mile from that, and that's going to come along very quickly, and the pace is just slowing a little bit. We're down 25 miles an hour, and that's because those riders now are just trying to conserve a little bit of energy before they go into that first real effort that they're going to have to put in for today's event. So this big group then, you can see they're all nicely bunched together. Riders just trying to ease up, just slightly work their way back through the group a little bit. A couple of the guys there in the dirt jersey, that is a club that I'm a member of, so good to see them representing today. As we come up to the first banner, there it is across the road. So this is when the clock starts on the first time segment, and we're looking at around about 6 minutes and 15 seconds. So based on the previous events, we can have an indication of what a good time is. And around about 6 minutes 15 for this section. So we've got a lead group, and then there's a chase group just behind, who crossed a few seconds behind. And you can see at the bottom there, we've got the profile. We've highlighted this first section, which starts off fairly flat, and then there's a little kick at the end. So I imagine it will break up a little bit as we come to the final half a mile of this section. But this group so far doing a good job of being all together. And what you might find is as we approach the end of this segment, you'll get an increasing of the pace as riders try to get across that finish line for this segment in first place. You might see one or two guys darting out early from the pack, trying to create a little bit of a gap to get a few seconds advantage over everybody else. You can see here now a few riders perhaps starting to fall off the pack as that pace increases. So this is back into the group then. So we've got a pack of around 42 riders at the moment. So this is looking like a good bunch. Again, still slightly downhill, as you can see in the top right hand corner on a green segment, -1%. That's going to keep the speed nice and high, keep that pack close together. So we're just coming up to 2 minutes into that segment, so that's about a third of the way through then. 3.6 miles into the event, but there's still a long way to go. So it's 31.5 miles in total. We're looking at around about an hour and 40 minutes for these riders to complete from start to finish. That will vary, of course, obviously by the ability of the riders, and also how much they decide to slow down between these segments, how much they want to rest and recuperate before hitting the subsequent sections. But so far, what you tend to find is that on these longer races, it's a bit of a race of attrition. You want to try and stay in that pack for as long as possible, and that's where you get the benefit of riding in a group. So you can conserve some energy, just like in the real world. If you're riding with a group of 10. If you're riding at the back, you can tuck in out of the wind, get into the slipstream, get that draft effect, and that allows you to conserve energy. But you do need to be careful, because if you start falling back a little bit, you can lose that slipstream, and that's when you can find yourself isolated and riding on your own. So it is very important to be in that group. That's how you're going to get the fastest times. But it could be that as the race develops, we get a couple of groups, and a group of 5 could go off the front, and it might actually be that the group of 20 behind is a little bit quicker. So that's what's really good about this time section format, is that just because you're not in that front group doesn't mean that your race is over. You can fight the whole way through for each of those segments, rest a little bit in between, and then push hard on those red sections that we see below. So looks like we are now over halfway through and starting to hit a little bit of a climb. Again, in that top right hand corner, you can see the little white dots, and that line just that they're on, that will go up and down depending on the gradient. And you can see the little number above now up at 4.6%. It's turned to a light orange color, indicating that the gradient is increasing, and now it's red because we've gone up to 7.7%. So this is where we'll start to see some separation between different groups. You can see already a few riders now starting to suffer as the pace increases up this climb. This gradient, a little bit harder work for the riders, and whilst it's easy to sit in the pack and get pulled along, as soon as the road starts going uphill, that's when you start to see the stronger and better riders coming to the front. But there's still a chance for all these other riders to regroup at the end of this segment, get back together with some of the other riders on the road, and they'll be able to push on these subsequent sections. So we've got the lead group on the left hand side of the screen here, chase group of some of the riders who we will catch up with later on the right hand side. But let's focus on the front group, because they're about a minute out now from the end of this first time section. So this section finishes at 5.4 miles on the road, so we're about half a mile from the finish. You can see it now in the top right hand corner of the screen, where that slightly orange colour on the gradient and the little dot at the end, that signifies the finish of this section. And look how those riders now are starting to fall out the back of this pack. And there's Ruben Klein in this group. You can see his name there, the little rider tags above the different riders. So Ruben is the founder and organiser of the Gran Fondo National Series. So a lot of respect for him. He's managed to put this great event together. And we've got a little interview with him that we'll be playing later on, where we'll have a chance to catch some of his thoughts on how the event has gone and how it's translated onto RGT. And here we are at the front then. So we've got our Lions, T-Shoes, Gary Stevens, Frankie Andreo, the former pro rider, Stephanie Sidlick, who's a very, very good female rider. And there we go, we've got that separation then, that front group of around 17 riders or so. And this is where they're really pushing to get over that finish line of the first section. We come round this bend and we'll start to see the banner over the road, just up the road. There it is, around that left-hand bend, and who's going to take the honours over this first time section. A little bit slower than we were expecting, at 6 minutes 45 or so. And there we go then, across first is Mr. Spiridonev. So well done to them, going across first. And what you'll see now is the riders start to easing up a little bit, starting to let this group come back together. There's no point these riders just speeding off now on their own. They want to get back into the pack, let the other riders catch up, regroup, and have a little bit of a rest. And it'll be interesting to see how many riders get back together into this pack, and how many form a second group in behind. So here's a few other riders then coming up to the end of that first section. You can see in the top right hand corner how it's blown apart, all those white dots separated out now across the road. There's a couple of riders coming up strong, really pushing there, look, as they come up to the finish line of that first section. And this front group then is reformed 19, 20, yeah, so 19 riders in this front group. We did have around 45 riders in the group at the start of that segment, so it shows just how much that little climb can really throw things apart. And so we're going to be speeding along now, and we're going to be looking out for 7.9 miles into the event. That's going to be the start of the next time section. You can see on the screen there, our Vince, that's Ryan Vince. He's a very good rider who had a very terrible accident last summer where he broke his hip in a cycle accident, had a long time off the bike. But it's good to see him coming back strong and getting across into that front group. And he's had a long road to recovery, so it's good to see him on the screen, and so far so good for him, putting in a good effort. And the course profile today is a really interesting one because some of the heavier riders, they might do okay in the first, say, 3/4 of the event. They'll be able to sit in a group, get over some of these smaller climbs. But when they hit that final time segment, it might be a little bit more difficult for them because that is a long climb. That final climb of the day, we're going to be looking at around 18 minutes for the quickest riders up there. And if you're a lighter rider, that's going to be a good advantage. So you're certainly not going to be out of the event at all because it's going to really blow apart on that final climb. You won't have much draft effect. It's going to be every rider for themselves. And at that point, it really will be all the way through the field, not just this front group, but those second, third, fourth groups on the road. They're really still going to be in the hunt for getting some good position today. So there we go, Stephanie Sidlick going in 5th place there on the road in the blue and pink jersey. She seems to be the highest placed female rider in today's event. She's doing well to hang on. It's getting quite strung out. I'm slightly surprised by how strung out this is on the road. You can see there's a bit of a separation there between 6th place and 7th place. So these 6 riders could be going off the front. They're going to hit this little downhill now, which is going to allow them to extend their lead a little bit as it goes out to about 34 yards. A few more riders coming over, but that's interesting because you've got a little group now. Well, it looks like another rider just coming over 7, and then a little chase group of 10 to 12 riders who will be a bigger group and probably travel a little bit quicker on the downhill. So interesting tactic to try and create some separation on this non-timed segment. And here we go, there's the pack coming back together. So whether that's some wasted effort remains to be seen, whether a couple of riders thought they could just push off and try and drop 1 or 2 riders to leave them isolated and make it harder for them on the time segments, not sure, but some interesting tactics there. So we are back to the second group then. So these guys are not too far back. They're actually only about 60 yards down the road. They're rolling well together. Actually, sorry, I beg your pardon, they're 1/3 of a mile back from that front group, but you can see there's a good number of them. So they're still going to be traveling at a pretty good speed, working well together. And that allows them then, when they hit that next time segment, they could still really push and post a time which is comparable to that front group. And the second section is 2.5 miles, so it's another short one. It is slightly uphill to start with, so that could create a little bit of separation. And they're just about to come up to it now, the lead group. They are 0.1 miles. And you can see on the right-hand side there, the road sign, the red warning triangle. That means the road's about to go uphill. And as a rider, that gives you a little bit of information, tells you the distance and the average gradient, a bit like you'll see on the side of the road. And look how much it's slowed down now, 10 miles per hour. And that's because these riders know that if they can cross that finish line last, they're going to have a little bit of an advantage. But Mark Rowbottom there, he's across first. He's gone a bit too soon, I'd say. But he probably wants to start pushing now because looking at that profile, it's pretty uphill. to start with, but you can see it's 9%. It's slightly deceptive. I didn't realize it was quite so steep. So that's partly why the speed has dropped. And now we will see the riders really starting to push to get up that hill to try and set the best time that they can for this section. And that's the great thing about this format. It's 4 races in one. So each of these are a mini race on their own. As Andrzej Krajewski comes across there to leapfrog Mark Rowbottom. So Krajewski's another strong rider from RGT platform. He was in the top 3 recently in the 2-week-long Tour de Monde series that was hosted in January. So that was replicating one of these sort of real-world day races where there was 12 races back to back. So he's clearly got good stamina, good legs. As our Lions now coming across. So all of these riders on this uphill section very much working almost independently. And it's quite a long section. Oh, actually, it's 2.5 miles, so 3.5 miles, beg your pardon. So they're uphill initially, then it's downhill, and then it's another climb. So it might regroup a little bit on the downhill section, but then it could again break away on the subsequent uphill. So it varies all the time with these little groups. And this section, we're looking at around about 9 minutes. So 9 minutes is the sort of magic number. That's the time that was set in qualifying for the lead riders. So if we look on the chase group then, they started this section a minute behind. And it's currently Kay Murphy from Ruben Klein leading out that second chase group. But this is where it's really interesting because we can compare the 2 times of these 2 groups, and we'll be able to look at those when they get to the finish line. And just because that front group got there first doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be there quicker across this time section. So it looks like they've crested that first climb on the left-hand side in that lead group, and it's all regrouped quite nicely there. So they're going to be traveling at some speed down this downhill section. We take a close up there of David Anderson, the American rider. And you can see it's 7% downhill gradient at the minute. So a bit of a chance for some of these riders just to ease off a little bit, have a little bit of recovery. As you can see up ahead, there's another little climb coming. We're on board now with David Anderson. He's right towards the front of this group. And there we see another red warning triangle. That means another climb is coming. Danger, get your legs ready. These riders behind just getting a little bit of a slingshot effect as they hit this climb straight into another 8% gradient section, and that speed is scrubbed off straight away. They've gone from 30 miles an hour down to 15 within a 0.1 mile or so. So that chase group on the right hand side, they're only a minute behind, and they are now on that downhill section as well, trying to catch up. But we will see how they get on at the end of the segment. So we're still around about 6 minutes for that group to get to the end. They're only about a third of the way through this time section. And then on the left, then the lead group, they're sticking together quite well. There's not too much separation there. Often you can find it gets very strung out, but it looks like they're doing well to stay together at the moment. As we get towards the end of this time section, I imagine it will be more strung out because those stronger riders will be wanting to push on to get that advantage, get to the finish line as quick as possible and get that short time. We see our Lions there pushing out the front again. Frankie Andrea there, 7th place at the moment, doing well to stay in that little group. So I can tell you that Frankie, he's well versed in this format. He has done several of the rides. So he has done 4 of these Fondo events, the Asheville one, the Boone, Golden and the Gentry Fondos. So he knows the format, he knows how to ride these. He's had some good results and he's ridden this course before, so he knows exactly what it takes to do well on this course. And obviously, being a former pro rider, he certainly has the pedigree to do so. So it's leveled off now, and on the left-hand side, you see there's 9 or 10 riders in a little group. You can see it's sort of splintered a little bit. There's a couple of riders 30, 40 yards behind. And now they've got a decision. They want to finish this time section as quickly as possible, because that's the section on the road that really counts towards their final time. But if they can't get onto this group, do they then ease up and just wait for the following group, get back in with a group, and so that they can get that draft benefit? Or are they going to try and push on their own? Or are they really going to try now and sprint try and close that gap and get back into this lead group, but at the risk of burning a couple of matches and then maybe being a bit too overexerted for the next couple of sections? These are all some of the calculations and tactics that the riders on the road need to be thinking about. And this is what makes this format really great for me, is that it's not just about the physical aspect of riding really strong from start to finish, it's also the mental aspect and the tactical thinking side of the event, and trying to work out, am I better in this group? Am I better trying to catch up with this rider? Should I ease off a little bit? Will I be better dropping back? So there's not much chance to relax at all, whether it's mentally or physically. Here we are then with Kendrick Murphy, and he's in a little group here with Jackson, Ruben Klein, Kapua and D Holmes. So they're in a little group of 5. They're rolling together quite nicely, all with a little bit of company there. And they seem to be the leading riders from this second group. So they've managed to pull away a bit of a gap of 100, 150 yards back to a few riders that they did start the section with. And you can really see in the top right there, all those white dots spread out on that little gradient chart in the top right hand corner. And what that little diagram shows is that's the half a mile up the road and half a mile down the road. So if you're racing, you can see if there's riders ahead of you, how close they are, and if there's riders behind, how much of a lead you have. So you've got a little visual clue up there, and then the more precise data on the left hand side on that rider leaderboard. And you can see the name tags there above each of those riders. And there's a little coloured bar that will move from left to right and change colour depending on whether it's to the left or right hand side. You just see that under each of their names. So if we pick out, there we go, a while there, you can see it's green at the moment, red, yellow, now green, down to blue. And what's that showing is the amount of effort that each of those riders are having to exert at that exact moment. So blue, that's more of a relaxed pace. Yellow, that's threshold pace. And then red, that's up. That's you sprinting out of the saddle. And that's what these riders are doing now. You'll see as we approach the end of this time segment, these riders now are really probably going to be mostly all in the orange and red sections. You can see it under their names, and also on the left-hand side on the rider leaderboard there. You can just see a little thin strip to the left-hand side of the screen, and look how they're all mostly red. And also their watts per kilo number next to their names, all red as well, indicating that they're really pushing at this stage as they come up to the end of this second time section. There's the banner. Ooh, not quite sure who got that one. Possibly it was Lyons or Krajewski perhaps. So now, wow, 10% downhill. Nice little recovery right after that. That's nice. It looks like Vile's just been slightly gapped here. Now it'd be interesting to see if the group ahead eases up, gives him a chance to get back on. As we cut across now to some of these chase riders. So we were expecting that to be around about 9 minutes or so. Looks like that front group, yeah, probably just easing up a little bit. You can see their numbers on the left-hand side, down in the 2 and 3 watts per kilos, and Weil here is up at 3.5 to 4, just trying to get back on. So he's just about to make it across back to that group. And there we go, back together. They gave him a chance to get back on. We're just going to take a short ad break here. Here's some footage from the real world events. Looking forward to getting back out there this year. I know I've missed riding outside, and luckily I managed to get a couple of rides in so far this year. So here we are then, back to the action. It looks like that front group of 7 is pushing on a little bit. I'd have thought they might have just eased up a little bit and allowed some of those following riders just to catch up and make their group a little bit bigger, because a larger group is going to travel quicker. I'd have thought maybe looking back on that leaderboard, you can see Frankie Andreu in 8th and Stephanie Sidlick in 9th. They're not too far back, 0.1 miles. So I'd have thought maybe the group would have just eased up and allowed these riders to come back together, join them on these non-time sections, because there's no need for these guys to really be pushing on at this stage. And that's going to help them be quicker when it does come to a time section. So that gives them a benefit on today's event over the riders that are in the 2nd and 3rd chase groups, and also against the riders in the other time slots throughout the day, because there are 4 championship events today, and all of the results are amalgamated together, and then they are compared with the different time slots. So you've got to be quick on the road for your time, but also quick overall as well. So here's another little group. You can see they've really eased off. And in the top left-hand corner, you can see a little bit of data there. And what that shows is their current power output, their cadence, so the number of revolutions of their pedals per second, and then also their heart rate. And then underneath that, you can just see that white line that looks like a heart rate chart, but actually that's their power output. You can see how it's sort of dropped off at the moment. That's because the riders are, whilst they're going uphill at 1.2% gradient, actually there's no need for them to be pushing. They can relax a little bit, form a little group, and that's what these guys are doing a good job at, is allowing riders to come back together so that when they do hit the time section, they've got a good sized group. So here we've got 7 or 8 riders. So that's actually the same size as that front group. So that could give them a good opportunity when it comes up to time section number 3 to really push on. And there, just as we look down the road, we can see D. Sagers and T. Witten and R. Jodin as well. So actually those guys are only 40 yards down the road. They're going to get into this pack, and suddenly they're going to be at 10 riders. So that's going to give them a numerical advantage over that front group. So that gives them a good benefit So even though they're further down the road, actually larger numbers means that they could be a little bit quicker as a whole compared to that front group, which may be stronger riders, but because there's fewer of them, they could actually tend to be a little bit slower. So we'll keep an eye on that as we get into time section number 3 to see how this group is doing in comparison to those front groups. And these guys are half a mile back now to some of the other riders who were in that front group. So it could also be that those riders, now knowing that they're not going to get back into this front little group with Tom Hughes and a few of these other riders here, R. Lyons, Andrew Kujewski, they might start thinking, well, actually, there's a big group behind. I'm just going to roll and cruise for a couple of miles, let those guys catch me up, and then I'm going to be in a nice fast bunch, and that's going to give me an advantage. There's no point riding in these time sections on your own because you're just going to lose bucket loads of time because you're not going to get any drafting benefit at all. So 14 miles down, the next time section starts at 16 miles. So we've still got 2 miles of rest for these riders. It's still a little bit up and down. It's not completely easing off. It's not a case of just rolling downhill for a couple of miles. There's still a little bit of effort to put in. And this front group then is 7 riders by the looks of things. But like I say, those groups behind are going to be swelling in numbers, and they certainly could find themselves having the advantage over these riders. So it's a fast downhill into the start of the next time segment, and that starts at 16 miles and is a 4.1 mile long section, which is initially fairly level, and then for the last mile or so it kicks up. So I'm sure we'll see some separation once again as the riders really try to break it up, put the hammer down and create some time gaps so that they can add up all their times throughout the day and get that advantage to see where they are on the leaderboard. As I've mentioned before, you want to be last into those time sections and then finish them as quickly as possible and be the first one across the line. Because if you've gone into that section last and finished first, you've overtaken everybody, so you instantly know that you're going to be quicker than everyone in your group. But you do just need to watch out that you don't fall too far back as you approach that group, because if you get disconnected from the group and you get out on your own, you really are in trouble, because you are then doing the whole time segment solo, and that's a hard effort. But these guys will get a little bit of a respite. You can see we've done in the top right hand corner 938 feet of climbing. So that's round about, well, not even a third, 30% of today's climbing. Today's climbing is 3,500 feet in total. The majority of that is in the last time section. So the riders are always going to have that in the back of their head. Look at that, you can see there on that profile, that section 4 is pretty much uphill for 6 miles to the finish line. So depending on what type of riders they are, if they're a climber, if they're a light rider, they might be relishing the fact of that final section and being able to get out in front and put some serious time into their competitors. If you're a rider like me and you're a little bit heavier, more of a sprinter than a climber, then you might be looking at that thinking, I really need to save some energy for that bit because that's going to be a tough section. So you might just be trying to sit in a little bit at these sections. You might not want to be putting in too much effort, and you just want to be maybe riding on the coattails of the other riders. So it looks like we've got 2 riders here, T. Witten and R. Jodane, who were slightly ahead of this group. Looks like they've been sitting up and they're just waiting for these other riders just to come back and catch them up so that they can have a little bit of a rest. So that was the halfway banner. That's halfway overall on today's course. So that's taken them around about 37 minutes to get to the halfway point, but with all that climbing yet to come, I'd imagine there's still a good 45 minutes at least of climbing, of overall riding for these guys today. And of course, it's not about that start to finish time. It's around those time sections. And overall, we'll be looking at around about 45 minutes of competitive riding today, within that overall hour and 40 minutes or so of riding. So on the right hand side, that chase group, you can see T. Witten still just riding off the front, not quite dropping back into that group. And on the left, there we go, time section 3 has started. And you can see that rider there who started at the back, they've come through that group. So they're going to have a little bit of an advantage already because they were 20 yards behind everyone when they crossed the start line. I think it was Rungacher who was the last one across the line, so they've got a little bit of an advantage already now. And these riders are going to be pushing on. Group of 7. There's a couple of riders behind them, so a group of at least 4, maybe 5 riders and a little group behind those guys. They've just started as well. And then we've got a larger chase group behind them who are around about 12, maybe 15 riders. So that's really going to give them the numerical advantage. And here we see a couple of riders, 2 riders breaking off the front. They've gone early. That's again a little bit surprising because this section is 4.1 miles long. So those 2 riders, if they can hold it for that distance, then that's clearly going to be a very good ride and going to give them a time benefit over these chasing riders. But I'd have thought that you might want to wait until maybe the final mile before making a move like that. Or it might be that they know that they are going to suffer on that climb, so they really need to take this race by the horns and put in the effort now so that they can get that time bonus during this section. But it's going to come back together. Looking at this, we've got those 5 riders working together, 5 versus 2. Generally 5 are going to be stronger than 2, and it all comes back together. So that was an interesting choice of tactics there by those front 2, because that's probably a little bit of wasted energy. So we've got those riders on the right hand side, they're still around about half a mile from the start of this next time section. They're hurtling downhill towards it. I'm surprised they're not cruising just a little bit more, just letting gravity pull them down the hill, save as much energy as they can. You can see that how much bigger that pack is as they go through the halfway banner. So I'm thinking there's around about 10, maybe a few more riders in that group. And on the left hand side, we can see one of the riders is being gapped. So that's going to reduce. So who's that? That's Garda Bike. So that's someone riding from one of our sponsors there, the Garda Bike Hotel. They've just had to work hard to get back on and into that group. And on the right hand side, we can see now this chase group coming up to the banner. And whilst they might be 3 minutes down on the road, we shall see what their finishing time is going to be when they get to the end of that section. So if you compare the speeds, the group on the left currently doing 26 miles an hour, group on the right also doing 26 miles an hour. So at the moment, if they kept those speeds up, it would be very close. But there is that climb at the end, and I imagine that group on the right hand side will start to fragment a little bit, and they will lose that draft benefit of being in a big group once they reach that climb. But they've got a good few miles of generally flat road to get to there where they can really make use of that group. You can see both of the groups are kind of spread out across the road. Now, often that means that they're not riding quite as hard as they could be. A good tactic would be to ride almost a team time trial formation where you have one rider on the front who's putting out a very strong effort. They do that maybe for 30 seconds or a minute. Then they can ease off, get into the draft, take a little bit of a rest, and then the next rider can take over. And often you'll see on the road, when riders aren't really pushing that hard, you end up with this sort of spread across the road because riders aren't having to work quite that hard. They're not really having to get into the slipstream. They're not getting left behind. It's happening a little bit more on this lead group then. You can see the front rider there. They're in the greens, they're in the blues. Our Lions now up into the yellows and oranges under their name. They're putting in another little effort here. You know, I'd be expecting to see these riders at the front doing at least 4 watts per kilo, if not 5, really driving the pace and then easing up, letting someone else come through. It looks like they're just about to come up to the start of that slow climb up to the end of the time section. They're just over halfway through this time section. This will finish at 20.1 miles. Again, they're not really pushing the pace too much, guys. A lot of them in the blue zone there, just almost relaxing in the slipstream. Whereas on this left-hand group, you can see a bit more green and yellow bars, people having to push on. And we see the red warning triangle on the lead group. 3% gradient starting now. So 1.5 miles uphill drag to the end of that section. And I think it gets slightly steeper as they approach the finish line. And now you see they're starting to get the orange and yellow bars. That means they're having to put in a bit more effort. That's because they're hitting the climb. It's getting steeper, 5% now. We're looking at around about 10 minutes for this section. So we're around about 2/3 of the way into it in terms of the time slot. A few red bars there. 4% gradient here. Not too steep, but you certainly will know about it when you're riding. So after this, we've got one long section for these riders to rest, and then it's into the final 6.1 mile climb up to the finish line. Right, there we go. So Lions leading out at the minute. And then we've got Krajewski, Rungsacher, Hughes, Spiridonov, Vile and Gardabike in behind. So that's your leading 7 riders. And they are coming up to the finale of the section number 3. It's just going to be around these corners. They've got about 0.2 miles left. And so they're just over our 10-minute target that we were talking about. And who's going to take this one? Looks like Spiridonov is leading it out. There we go, look at this, Rungsacher and Weil really pushing to get across. And Hughes as well, whoa, 5 of them across the line in unison there. So, not quite sure what that means for the overall times, but 10 minutes 36, that was how long they took to complete that section. All of them there really pushing to get across and get as many valuable seconds as they could. Now they get a little bit of a rest. And I'm sure they'll let it all come back together as we now check out this chase group. So there are a few riders in between these 2 groups, but we're focusing on this group because it's quite a large size. So we think there's an opportunity for them to try and beat this 10 minutes and 36 seconds. They're still doing quite well, even they're quite together, even though we're on this 2% gradient. Ruben Klein in there, and after this time section we're going to bring you a little interview that I conducted with Ruben just to get his thoughts on how it's been translating the real world Gran Fondo series onto the virtual racing world, and we'll get his thoughts on that in a moment. So these riders now within a mile of the end of this section, so they've got just under 2 minutes to complete that final push to the line. We shall see how they get on. They're all pushing quite hard. They've got the red numbers there, the red bars under their names. They come up to 19.5 miles. You see the reminder on the left-hand side there, 10 minutes 36. That's the target time that these guys are trying to beat. Even though they're a little bit further down the road in terms of actual position, they're still pushing strongly within this group. You can see in the top right-hand corner, they can see now that that finish line isn't too far ahead. And they're really going to be wanting to start pushing now, trying to get there as quick as possible. As we can see a move off the front there. So Kay Barkley is making a move off the front. And then Witten is looking to follow. Ruben Klein hanging on in there. D Holmes as well. But it looks like it's Barkley out of this group, the Scottish rider, who is really going to be pushing on and putting some time into his rivals from this group. I'm sure once he reaches the top, he'll be sitting up. So he's still got around about a quarter of a mile to go. Doesn't look like they're going to beat the 10:36 time set by that front group, but doesn't look like they're going to be too far off. And we say these guys are 3 minutes down on the road, but actually when you look at their times across the time sections, they're not that far behind. It's that cumulative time of all 4 time sections which is going to determine the overall results, both from this event and the 4 events that are being held across the whole day. So here's Barkley then, and Lucursi, who I'm not sure if that's a rider he's caught or whether that was a rider who's come across. And they're coming up now, the last little push to this end of this time section. There's the banner. So 11:16 or so. So that's a good effort. That's 40 seconds behind. So even though, like I say, they're further down the road, they managed to do that section in only 40 seconds slower. And that's partly because they're in that bigger group. So that gave them a good draft benefit, allowed them to work together, work quicker. You can see on the left-hand side, they are going up a bit of a climb, but they're still not really pushing down the power. So we're going to take a quick break now, and we're going to speak to Ruben Klein, the founder and organizer of the Gran Fondo National Series, and find out how he's found the online translation of his racing series. So earlier today I caught up with Ruben Klein. He's the founder and organizer of the Gran Fondo National Series. Welcome, Ruben.
Hey, nice to talk with you, Mike.
So this is the first time you've brought the Gran Fondo National Series to a virtual setup. How have you found it?
It's been far more fun than I had anticipated, to be honest. We were really set on bringing our time section format over. It's our DNA of our events, and I'm honestly not that much of an indoor rider myself. I'm riding rollers a half dozen times a year kind of person, and I've actually myself personally had a blast with it, and it's been far more engaging and fun than I anticipated. And the feedback from the community's been really good. People seem to have had a great time, and that was our intention with it.
Yeah, I raced one of the events and I found the unique style of racing with the time segments very interesting, created a dynamic race. And do you think it's translated well onto the online RGT platform?
I do. One of the struggles with what I started creating back in 2011, and we've done this time section format ever since, is that for some reason some people think it's not a race. They're like, well, that's not a race. And I'm like, well, there's 4 timed race sections, that's a race. Like if you have a time trial, that's a race. That's one time section. We cover 100 miles in most of our Gran Fondos, and we have 4 race segments. And we wanted to translate that over and carry it into the virtual events as well. And RGT Cycling did that really well. They helped us pioneer that. They did the development work on it, and we were able to present it. And for me, it's an opportunity to get people to understand that there's a lot of strategy and a lot of bike racing that happens within this time section format. It's just not an independent, oh, you're doing this time trial 4 times. You still need to know how to race a bike. You need to know what bike racing is about if you want to do well in it. And at the same time, it breaks down those barriers to peloton dependency or getting caught out of a break. You can end up with a different group and end up having a really good day still.
Yeah, I found that different group format really interesting. We've been covering several different groups today and seeing how they race against each other, and also because of the multiple time slots throughout the day as well, which is something I suppose riding online allowed you to do. You're also racing 3 other races later on in the day.
Absolutely. And you might be in one group or another group in your race time or in a different race time. But at the end of the day, you're racing the same exact road, right? It's the same exact time segment. So it's allowed us to have an international field of riders who are all competing against each other, even though it's happening at various times across the country.
Yeah, it really has brought people together, and I think it's been a great success from what I've seen, and hopefully you'll be bringing it back next year. Have you got plans for that?
Absolutely, we do.
Good stuff. And as we wrap up this virtual competition, I know you have real world events as well, and are you going to have a chance for a little bit of a break, or are you jumping straight into the organisation for that?
Last night I was having nightmares that I was socially being pulled out to dinner the night before the event and needed to mark the course and get registration ready and everything the next day for the event, and had no time, and I'm like nightmare about it. Because on March 21st, we will be putting on our first event, Gran Fondo Florida. We will move into, with COVID and everything, it's the world we're in. And our time section format has allowed us to take a unique approach because we can implement that social distancing very much the same as what we talk about whenever we're talking about the virtual and having these time zone races and it's all being the same. It's the same when you do a wave start format for a Gran Fondo National Series event. You roll out on your wave, we'll launch people with 25 riders per wave, and they go out throughout the day and they race the time segments. Riders can choose their start wave time so they can be with their mates and race together, etc. Their team. But no, there's no break. It's we're hitting the ground after this and we're running. I'll be leaving next week with the trailers loaded up and heading to Florida to get back to it, be able to get some rubber on the roads and race.
Well, that sounds fantastic, and I know you've got 7 or 8 events over the course of the summer, so I wish you all the best with those, and I hope you've enjoyed all the virtual racing, and Ruben will be hopefully catching up with you again next year. All the best for your outdoor season.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we see you in person sometime.
Hopefully one day. Yeah, no, it certainly would be great to come over and do it in person. It's been great exposure for your event, and I've certainly learned a lot about it just by participating in this online world.
Yeah, I watched one of your coverages and I was like, this guy gets the strategy. Right? How to play the game. So awesome. Well, thanks for catching up with us, Mike, and wish you the best in the championship.
Great, thank you very much, and I will catch you again soon.
Yep.
Cheers,
all right,
Ruben.
take care.
So that was Ruben Klein that I caught up with, and he is the founder and organizer of the Gran Fondo National Series. And here he is on the screen, currently in one of our chase groups. But he certainly understands the format. He knows that it makes complete sense to be in a group on the road. And surprised it's not quite come back together, but it might just be because we're on this uphill section, and then hopefully a few of those riders will start to bring it back together, allow each other to get a little bit of a rest before we then head into that final climb of the day, section 4, which starts at 25.4 miles. So still a couple of miles to go before they get to that. And as you can see, that is a 6.1 mile long section, and it's going to be round about 2,000 feet of climbing. So that's quite a long effort. We're looking at around about, well, looking at the previous results, we've suggested 18 minutes, but perhaps it might actually be a little bit more than that, just looking at the speed of some of these groups. We said that section 3 would be 10 minutes, and they were around 10 minutes 30, so a little bit slower than we were expecting. It's possibly because this championship event is invitational only. You have to qualify to get to this event. So these group sizes are a little bit smaller than what we saw during the open qualifying events, where we had upwards of 200 riders in each event. So larger pack sizes would have made those groups a little bit quicker. But because this is an exclusive invitational championship event, we are seeing slightly reduced pack sizes, which is affecting those times. And it just shows the difference that being in a pack can make. So looks like a few of the riders that were caught in between the two groups have now dropped back towards the chase group. So looks like Sidlick, Andreu, Stevens, they're in a little group caught in between, but looks like they could just drop back to Ryan Vince, Anderson, Mark Rowbottom. It would make sense for those guys just to team up a little bit. But that final climb, it's uphill, it's 6-7% gradient. It's going to be a reduced benefit from being in a group. So it might just be at this point, these riders think, oh, we just need to push on now. There's no point easing up too much. Let's not smash it up until that climb. Let's just ride at a comfortable pace. Let's just tick it over a little bit of tempo pace where you're just cruising along, and then once you hit that climb, you can put your effort in, and you know it's probably could split up, and you're gonna not get much draft saving, maybe 10-20 watts, whereas when you're on the flat you can be saving 200-300 watts when you're in a group. So that's when you really get the benefit. So once again, riders having to make those decisions out on the road, using their brains as much as their legs to work out what their tactics are going to be, because it's shifting all the time. As the gradient changes, as the groups change, you need to be thinking on your toes and working out the best tactic for you. And that also depends on what type of rider you are. If you're a good climber, maybe you don't need to be in a group because you think, I'm just going to drop these guys once we hit the climb, so I don't need to worry about them. But if you're a bit more of a sprinter, a Mark Cavendish or Andre Greipel, Caleb Ewan, you're probably going to want to be in a little gruppetto and getting as much draft saving as you can. So got the two groups then, and once again, when we hit that final climb, we will be timing the riders just to get an indication of how they are handling it between the different groups. And that front group now is not too far away from the base of that climb. And you can see now just that green dot has just come into view on the right hand side of that elevation chart. So that's about half a mile out from the start now. And at that point, I think we will see probably these 7 riders splinter a little bit. They've done well to hold it together on some of the shorter climbs, but at that point, it's pretty much going to be a 20-minute threshold effort up that final climb to the finish line. There's a couple of little moments in the final third where there are a couple small downhill sections with a little bit of rest, and then the final half a mile or so, there's a couple of flat sections as well. But pretty much you're going to be pushing as hard as you can, trying to gain as much time as you can over other riders in this last section. There's going to be nowhere to hide. there's not going to be any opportunity to sit on. It's going to be, there you go, there's the red triangle on the right hand side of the road. There's the banner across the road. Looks like Tom Hughes is going to be leading it out. He's going early. He's crossed the banner first. Already a little bit of separation. He's 30, 40 yards ahead of the final rider over that time section banner. And he is making a break for it straight away from the off. And this is where your watts per kilo becomes the more important metric over your pure watts. You can see on the left-hand side, in the top left, you can see how his power has really started to ramp up. And now you can see on the leaderboard there, he's Tom Hughes at the top, 5.1 watts per kilo. And then just coming back down, here we are to D Gardabike and Richard Lyons. They're around about 4.5 to 4.9. Lyons now getting up maybe to 5, trying to push on a little bit. And there's Weil behind. He's around about 4 watts per kilo. So the higher that number, the quicker you're going to get up that hill. We're on a 5%, sorry, Robert Lyons, currently in second place there. And now you can see already up to 8% gradient. This is where you want to be setting out a real good tempo, really consistent pedaling style. There's no benefit from slightly easing, because as soon as you do, you're just going to drop speed. So we're 12 miles per hour at the moment for Tom Hughes here, leading this final climb. And we're back to Lyons, and it's still pretty close between this little group behind of 5 riders. So there's a chance for all of them. You can see here, there they are, little group. So depending on those earlier results, there could still be a chance for these all to jump up to second or fall back to 6th place. All depends on those earlier segments as well and what their position was in those, as it is about the cumulative time across all of these sections. But at the moment, it's looking like Tom Hughes is putting in a solid effort. It's like he's laying down a marker for wanting to be number 1 on the road and number 1 in time as well. And then we can see the second group on the road, the Frankie Andreu and Stephanie Sidlick group. They were just coming up to the start of this climb, which snakes up through the mountains. You can see around these hairpins and a few names written on the road there. Bit of encouragement for the riders, see your own name on the road as you are climbing up. So now we do see a bit more separation. You see ahead of these 3 riders, you can see that Rungacher and Lyons have just pulled out a 50-yard lead from these 3. They're still running at a pretty good tempo, but this is where perhaps Stephanie Sidlick, you can see just down in 7th place there, but she's putting out 5.1 to 5.5 watts per kilo. And if she can keep that up, she's going to ascend this hill quicker than these few riders up the road. And it's quite a long climb, so there's a chance that she could start to come back into contention here, along with Stevens as well. Look, he's sitting on her wheel, and they've managed to pull away from Andreu and Armstrong, and they're making a bit of a break for it. So we could see that they're going to close. So at the moment, you can see they're 0.46 miles back. They've got 5.7 miles to go. So at this rate, it could happen, I would suggest. They are climbing at about maybe 10% more power output, and they are, I think they've got enough road to close that gap. So we'll keep an eye on that, because that could really see Sidlick pushing herself up that leaderboard. But currently it's Tom Hughes at the front. He's also up over 5 watts per kilo. That's a respectable watts per kilo for a 20-minute effort. He needs to make sure that he's not going too hard too soon. You know, it's easy to push out those sort of numbers for 3, 4, 5 minutes, but when you're approaching 20 minutes at that pace, that's when you need to be really sure that you can maintain it. That is good numbers for our amateur riders. So we come up here through the scenery, through these cliffs. So we're about a quarter of the way up the climb then, 5 minutes in, 4.9 miles to go. And here we are back to the larger chase group on the road. And they are just a short distance now, a few hundred yards away from the start of the climb. They're doing well at the moment to stay together. But it will be interesting to see what happens once they hit that climb. And there it is, there's the banner over the road as they come up to that just ahead. Will we see anyone trying to push right from the off? Or will they try and stick together for as long as possible? Nope, there we go, there's Witten off the front, there they go. Tara Witten. She's not hanging around, she's seen the banner and she is gone. We've then got Stevens in behind, trying to hold on, but there's Tara Witten. And she's got 0.2 miles to catch Mark Rowbottom and then Ryan Vince, Anderson, Krajewski. She's got a chance of catching those guys. Like I say, it's a good 20-25 minute climb. So plenty of distance still to go. So we'll keep an eye on that little battle on the road as well. It just shows that just because you're in that lead group or further up the road at the start, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in that lead group on the leaderboard. But this is also where I mentioned earlier on about if you're a slightly heavier rider, you can make good time by being in the pack. You can put the advantage in when you're on the flat, but then the advantage is reversed and it's the lighter riders on this final climb. It makes it such an interesting course. Again, bringing in those tactics. Those lighter riders, they maybe weren't able to be quite so quick on those flat sections, but now this final climb, it brings it all back together, completely throws it back open, all to play for still. So it really means that the whole way through the event, there's always something to race for. It's not down and out because you've got dropped in the first couple of miles. It's all the way to the end. You can be competitive. As we can see, it's starting to break apart. Rich Joe Doyne here. Got the Gran Fondo National Series jersey on there, the blue jersey with the white and red bands on. So they are doing quite well at the minute. It looks like they're not quite gaining on Stevens. Looks like Witten's charge towards the riders ahead is slightly eased up. Here's Kevin Barkley, who put in that great effort at the end of the third time section. Looks like he's making a little bit of a move here, coming past a couple of riders. He's now pushing on to try and catch up with Stevens just up the road. And you can see it's a real international field. We've got Barkley and Stevens here, a couple of British riders. And then just behind we had a German rider, and there's a few Americans in here as well, as you'd expect, being an American series. But Tom Hughes still out in front, extending that lead now to 0.13 miles, well ahead of the chase group of Rungacher and Spiridona and one of our sponsors, Garda Bike. So all of our competitors in the championship event have a chance of winning either a 3-day, 3-night stay at the Garda Bike Hotel in Italy, or some products from Hyper Ice and their recovery products such as massage guns, or they have these very impressive full-size, full-leg boots that you put on and they assist with recovery. And one of the big things with online racing is that compared to real-world racing, you can be racing every day. There's events all through the day, every single day, and it's very easy to be racing back to back to back, and you really do then need to think about your recovery, whether that's protein shake, healthy eating, but also through products such as massage guns and the Hyper Ice boots. It's all a way to make sure that you're recovering and allowing your muscles a chance to recuperate and you're not doing damage to your body. And of course, going to the Garda Bike Hotel, that'd be a fantastic stay. Some lovely riding around there. So back on the road, we've got our lead group, currently 10 minutes into the climb. So still at least 10 minutes of climbing to go, 4 miles for those guys. And then in our chase group, Tara Whitten, a little bit further back down the road, but making good ground. And here's Stephanie Sidlick. Looks like she's dropped Stevens, dropped Andre, who she was in a little group with, and not quite making as much ground as we perhaps thought on those front riders. She's still round about 0.45 miles behind them, but there's still 4.6 miles to go, so she still has a chance to catch those guys up. There's Andrzej Kajewski, who we mentioned earlier on. He's currently sitting in 10th place on the road. It might be that some of those riders behind him are a little bit quicker up those time sections. There's Anderson. Looks like he's managing to pull away from Armstrong and Rowbottom. Ryan Vince, who are doing an okay job at holding Tara Whitten at bay at the moment. You can see there, it's a 7% gradient. It's fairly consistent. Looks like Ryan Vince was just gaining there on Mark Rowbottom, managing to maybe gain a couple of places, gain a little bit of time on the road. Here's Tara holding out a steady 4.5 watts per kilo. And just behind her, Kevin Barkley, who's just ahead of Stevens. He's just ahead of Joe Doyne, the Canadian rider, who's just ahead of Tyler, German rider, and then Sager's just behind the Belgian rider, and Jackson just behind him, American rider. So then a little run of American riders, Wegner and Murphy just behind. So a good international field here today. That's one of the big benefits of riding virtually online, is that of course you're not limited by the geography, and that's, for me, it was great to be able to ride one of the E-Fondos and actually get to experience the event. It's something that would be obviously very challenging for me as someone living in the UK to get across to the States and ride one of the events. Would take a lot of organisation, so being able to do it virtually and ride such a unique style of time section racing, it was great to be able to do that using the RGT platform and ride on some routes which I otherwise probably wouldn't be able to ride on. We've got a Brazilian rider, so yeah, real good spread from across the world here today. Mark Riding's another American rider, also riding for the Dirt team. Stands for Dad's Inside Riding Trainers. Really good online community. And there's quite a few different clubs being represented here today. So yeah, good to see everyone out in force today. So these riders, 25 miles into the event, still 5 miles to go, but it's going to be the slowest 5 miles because it is all uphill. And they've still got a little way. Try and capture everybody in this event. Looks like most of them are now within the final time section. We cut back to Tom Hughes then. He's now on a 10.2% gradient. Some of the steepest climbing on today's race. 2.5 miles to go, still around about 750 foot of climbing. So he's not quite there yet as we hit a 16% gradient section. He's going to be out the saddle, he's going to be in his lowest gears. He's going to be grinding those pedals as we come around that hairpin, up this little bump. He then does get a little bit of respite once he's over this. I say little bump, let's be honest, this is going to be a tough little bit of the climb. He's been climbing for 15 minutes solid. He's going to be feeling that in his legs, especially those double-digit gradients. 14% there, and that's not 14% for 20 yards. That was a good few hundred yards of real steep climbing. That's definitely going to be burning after such an hour and 20 minutes worth of riding today. So as he comes up to 15 minutes on this final time section. And they're down at 6 miles per hour, so they really are crawling at the moment. Once they're over that, they will get a little bit, like I say, respite, and they'll be able to kick on again for the final couple of miles. Looked like Hughes maybe had a little bit of a technical issue there. He stopped pedaling briefly, but he's back going again. That's good to see. Would hate to see him, after putting in such a strong performance here, suffer a technical issue that would cost him. So these guys just behind then, you can see there's 4 of them together. They're getting a little bit of a draft benefit down this short little climb. They're doing well to stay together up that first section of the climb, and now they're hitting these real steep slopes. And it's Weil who is now really pushing on, leading away. Garda bike doing well to be in our top 5 at the moment. But Spiridonov is coming up just behind. And then half a mile back down the road, which is slightly deceptive because these guys have just done a little bit of downhill, is Stephanie Sidlick. And here's Tom Hughes then. He's back onto a downhill section. He's got under 2 miles now to the finish line. He's got a last little bit of descent, and then he's going to be climbing again for 2 miles up to that finish line. Still 500 feet of climbing within that 2 miles, so it's not going to be easy. He now has a 0.4 mile lead over Robert Lyons, who is just cresting that penultimate climb. He's going to get that little downhill rest, and then he's going to attack the final 2 miles, I'm sure, as hard as he can, using whatever energy he's got left after an hour and 20 minutes of pretty solid riding. You can see in the top left his power. He's easing off. He's down to 150 watts. That'll be back up over 300, I'm sure, once he gets onto the climbing section. As he takes this final bend, there we go. You can see the red warning triangle again. Get your legs ready. Rungacher, he's just about to crest that penultimate hill as well, and then hit the downhill section. And then he's not too far ahead. He's only 0.1 miles ahead of our little chase group of 3 riders. He's going to need to make sure that he pushes on down this downhill, because those 3 riders behind will get a little benefit, but there's not too far to go now. And because this is, like as I mentioned before, just one of 4 events, we won't know the overall champions until later on in the day, because we need to collate the time from all 4 events and then compare them all, and then create an overall leaderboard. And there are prizes for the men's and women's overall leaders, and then different age groups as well. There's different age group categories, so lots of competitions within the overall competition. As we see Tara Whitten on the right hand side, looks like she's now been passed by Stevens and Barkley, but they are catching up with, well, Whitten is just about to pass Armstrong, and they are now only 0.1 miles behind Rowbottom, who started a good few minutes ahead of these guys. So Tom Hughes still 1.3 miles from the finish. It feels like it's been several minutes since we last caught up with him. I feel like he should be a bit closer, but these 11% gradient, it really is taxing on the legs, taxing on the lungs. Those watts there, up over 350, 400 watts there, just momentarily. He's really pushing. Those watts are a little bit up and down. I'm not sure if that's just because of a bit of fatigue setting in, perhaps. He's trying to push, but then he's easing up because he just can't quite maintain that pace. Let's go back here to Lyons, who's pace has also eased off a little bit. It's a 5% gradient. You can see his power chart on the top left-hand corner there has dropped down quite considerably. Whether that's, I thought that wasn't a technical issue, as he is still pedaling at 200 watts. Maybe that's just a case of he's really starting to feel the effort a little bit. And then behind we've got Rungacha, Spiridonov and A. Bile. As they come up to the 30-mile point section. So there we go, there's the time section. Bile just coming across for that time section. In 20 minutes and 45 for him. Looks like he's absolutely gassed there. He's pretty much come to a stop, same as Garda Bike. But they haven't quite finished the event. So the time section actually finishes before the overall finish line. So they've still got 1.5 miles to go to get to the end of the event. We cut back down now to Stephanie Sidlick. She's got around about 0.2 miles to that end of that time section, which actually, yeah, as I mentioned, 1.5 miles from the end. So on this 13% gradient then, this really is going to be hurting those legs. As Tom Hughes, he's got the last 0.6 miles up towards the end of the whole event. So he's going to take the overall honours on the day on the road. He's got 750 metres there, 0.5 miles. But we will need to compare all of the times, all of the overall times from across the day and across the various groups on the road. So Tara Whitten on the right hand side there in this chase group. Got a couple riders just ahead of her who started in the same group as her. We've got about a mile to go now for the end of the time section. Tom Hughes is going to take the honours on the day. There's 0.2 miles left for him now. You can see how he's trying to push on just to get the day done. He keeps easing off. The fatigue's starting to set in now after almost a long ride on the bike. Almost an hour and a half out on the bike today. There we go then, into the banners, into the hoardings. And there's the finish line just around the corner. And there he goes, crosses the line to take the overall win on the road, but we will work out what his place is in the time sections. I'm sure he's done very well though, considering he was the fastest one up that final climb for section number 4. So well done to Tom. And here's Lyons now. He's still got 750 metres there. 0.5 miles on the road, a little bit further to go for him. Again, did very well in that final time section, so I'm sure he's going to be well up there come the end of the day once all these times are put together. So these riders do have to make it all the way to the end. They can't just finish after the end of the 4th time section. They have to cross the finish line to ensure that those times are recorded properly. So we're going to keep following as these other riders still got a little way to go. You can see how it's sort of blown apart on this final climb as we expected. Riders all across the spectrum of the road. A couple of groups did manage to stay together. Rungacha in third and Spiridonov in fourth. They managed to stay together in a little group. But a lot of these other riders ended up riding solo up this final climb, just riding it there at their pace and their tempo. As Lyons comes across then to take second on the day, 25 minutes from the start of the time section 4. And they're going to finish a little way ahead of Rungacha here, Italian-based rider who's pushing all the way to the end. And I'm sure, oh look, we've got Spiridonov just coming through, just they're battling all the way to the end. That's good to see that it's not giving up, not just cruising across. It's a race to the end. So well done Spiridonov, just to come across and take third on the road. And Rungacha coming across then in fourth place. And they're going to be followed behind by one of our raffle prize winners, provider, sorry, not winners, provider, the Garda Bike Hotel. You can see their branding on some of the signage as well as we've been riding through today. You can see them on the banners and the hoardings on the side of the road. So they've just got the last quarter of a mile or so. You can see some Hyperice branding there as well. Our other raffle prize donor. You can see how Stephanie Sidlick behind has jumped up to 6th place now. Looks like they're pushing all the way to the line. Look like Weil is just absolutely blown on that time section. He's got to the time banner and he's just now cruising. He's given it his all to get to that point, but he's still got that last mile and a half to get to the finish line to set that time and make sure it's recorded. Here we go then, Garda Bike in the Italian kit, coming up to the final corner to take 5th place on the road. So if you have enjoyed the racing today, then this format is available out in the real world, starting within, as we heard from Ruben in his interview, literally 2 weeks today is the first Gran Fondo of the series. So that's taking place in Florida on the 21st of March. Not too late to sign up, which I think you can sign up all the way up to the day before for the Florida one. And then throughout the summer, there are events across the country. Check out the Gran Fondo National Series.com website. But whether you're based on the East Coast or the West Coast or in the center of America, there is an event, hopefully not too far from you. It's a very enjoyable format. I do thoroughly recommend giving it a go. It does allow you to actually have a bit of a rest in between the time sections. I'm sure a lot of you watching have been out and done sportives and actually want to just enjoy the food stops, but you're always a little bit conscious of the time ticking by, and you probably jumped on your bike a little bit quicker than you wanted to try and get to the finish line that little bit quicker. So by focusing on time sections, it gives you a chance to really have a nice rest in between, have a bit of a chat with your buddies and other riders. So it's a great format, and hopefully it'll be very successful once again for Ruben out there this year, having had to skip last year because of the obvious issues that we've had with the pandemic. But hopefully now that is all going to be behind us and we'll be able to start enjoying our sports and our social activities once again. So that was Stephanie Sidlick, our lead female rider, crossing the finish line. We now have Stevens, who's also overtaken Weil, and then behind him is Grajewski. So they're just coming up to the finish line now. 3,327 foot of climbing, 31.39 miles. So 100 foot per mile on average, just over. That is a solid day in the saddle. Roundabout, you can see here, 1 hour 34 minutes, and there's still riders down the road. These last mile and a half are going to probably feel very difficult. They would have been pushing on that time section, and now they're cruising to the line. They would have spent most of their energy trying to make sure that they got through those 4 time sections as quick as possible, but cruelly, there's still 1.5 miles from that final section to the finish line. And these riders now are just cruising through, making sure that they don't quit, don't leave early, but you can see how they're down at just 100 watts or so, under 2 watts per kilo. They really are just doing everything they can to get across that finish line now. Even now it's still at a 3% gradient for the last few hundred yards on the road. And also, if you have been enjoying the racing, don't forget that on RGT Cycling you can join any group ride or race for free. You can check it out, and that's all of the time. That's not a limited trial. You can just sign up on the app, join an event, and give it a go. And I thoroughly enjoy it. These riders thoroughly enjoy it. I would definitely recommend it. And like I say, you've got nothing to lose because it is free. So download the apps, check out the website, rgtcycling.com. And then maybe by next year, when this event rolls around again, you'll be an absolute expert in the platform and be able to come out here and smash it like some of these riders have this year. I'm sure we will see some of these riders coming back next year as well for a second stab at things. I'm sure some of these riders will be riding in real life as well, going to one of those real world events and checking it out. So here's Frankie Andreu. Makes a change for me to be commentating on his race. He has been providing some commentary for online races. The Echelon Racing League he has been commentating on, and I've been riding in those, so it's a bit of a role reversal today. So yeah, that's been a bit of a change. This is his 5th Gran Fondo event, so he's managed to complete half of the qualifying event and then today's championship event. I know he's certainly enjoying the format. He's going to be in 11th place on the road. He started off strongly in a couple of those big front groups, and then there was a little bit of a split. And here's Ryan Vince coming up in 12th place on the road. I think he's done quite well on the climb. He was a bit further back. I know it looks like he's overtaken a few riders. I mentioned earlier, he had that nasty accident last summer. So it's good to see him back and doing well, enjoying his riding again. This was a rider who was doing 250 miles per week on the bike. So really putting out big distances. He's not going to catch Frankie now. Frankie's got 0.1 miles to go, just around this final corner. Then he's going to be able to rest up for the rest of his Sunday. It's the nice thing for the American riders, a little bit earlier for them, so they've got the whole of the rest of the day to relax. Whereas our European riders, it's now approaching 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, late afternoon, so they'll be grabbing some supper and then just relaxing on the sofa, I imagine. There's Frankie now, comes around to take the banner. Great effort by him. And good to see a few of the riders there sticking around. I'm sure they're messaging each other on the in-game message board, giving each other a little bit of encouragement and congratulations. There's always a good bit of rider feedback at the end, and good to see everyone engaging with each other. There's a real good community feel on these events, like there is in the real world, with congratulations and admiration for some of the strong performances. as Brian now comes across the line. So record his time, get that in the bank. So all of the results are going to be available later on today after the culmination of all 4 rides, and they will be available via the Facebook page and the Gran Fondo National Series.com website. So keep an eye out for those if you have been one of the riders today or one of the riders in the other time slots. Good strong finish there by Matt Armstrong. A little bit of a sprint across the line. Managing to just finish ahead of Barkley and then Stevens. It looks like they swapped around a little bit. And then Tara Whitten, who's going to be there. She is just crossing the line. She was our second female rider on the road. So we're going to keep following some of these riders. They come up to the finish line. So they're going to be coming across now in 1s and 2s. Looks like a few of them are still pushing good numbers. Here's Rich Jodoin up to the line. Everyone seems to be finishing pretty strongly across the finish line. They have had a little bit of a rest after the end of that time section, and as it flattens out, always nice to finish strongly as opposed to just crawling across the line. There's Dirk Sagers, the Belgian rider. Patrick Jackson here, that's coming across for the 21st on the road. 1 hour 41. So that's a good solid ride for an indoor trainer ride. Usually most indoor races are around about an hour. So anything over an hour is a good solid effort, especially when you're racing as well. Not just cruising along, not just a steady state workout. You're having to push through those hard efforts. That's a good day in the saddle. So I can tell you that in the earlier group, the winner of that, well, the first one on the road was 1 hour 32, so fairly comparable to today's event, or this time slot event. But we'll have to wait and see how that compares to the individual time sections. There's a bit of a target there for the later time slots as well. I'm sure they'll be watching and totaling up the times and trying to work out what they've got to do for later on in the day. That's one of the benefits of riding later, is that you can find out some of the results by going to people's Stravas or watching some of the live streams, and that gives you a little bit of insight. Might help, might not. It means you might have to push that bit harder at the end, but it's pretty tricky to be working out those times on the road as you are also riding. It's pretty tricky to multitask. Some people manage to do it a little bit better than others. So we're just going to follow a few more riders up to the finish line. We're going to keep the coverage going until Ruben crosses the line, the organiser and founder of the Gran Fondo National Series. He's a couple places back from Thyler that we're just following here. So he's got a couple hundred yards to go. coming just about to be passed by Lucursi, who's finishing strongly, the Brazilian rider. So this time segment format is going to be available to the community riders and organisers on RGT at some point later this year. It'll be able to, so one of the benefits of RGT is that anyone can set up a group ride if they have a premium account or an event or a race. They can set it up at any time that they like on any route or course that they like, and then they can invite their mates to come and race it with them. And there's other formats such as time trial mode and elimination mode, and these time segments are going to be made available, as I understand it, sometime later this year. So that will be an excellent addition to the different tools that organisers have, and it will allow some really exciting racing on those different events, I'm sure, later on. So there's a good little bunch of riders coming up to the finish line then. Just behind them, we've got Ruben Klein, who will be our next rider across the line. He's got around about 100 yards to go. And here he is. Oh, there he is, coming across the line. Take 28 on the road. We will see how he's done. I'm sure he's a master tactician, I know. He's got this format dialed down to a T. I'm sure he's hit all of those time segments absolutely to the best of his ability. So great to see him coming across there. So it was great to have that interview with him earlier. And I'm sure he'll be pleased to welcome you to any of the real world events later on through the year. And they will be kicking off, as we mentioned, in 2 weeks' time. And we're just going to give you a little recap now of where those 8 E-Fondo events are. And they are going to be right across the country. Here we go. So it's nice to say, starting in Florida in 2 weeks' time, then heading up to the Tour of Georgia, the Highlands Gran Fondo in New Jersey, the Asheville Gran Fondo in July, followed by Boone, also in North Carolina, a couple of weeks later, then across to Golden, Colorado, Frederick, Maryland, out to the West Coast, San Francisco for the Gen Z Gran Fondo, and then it'll be back to Asheville for the championship event. So that's coming up through the summer, and that's the Colnago Gran Fondo National Series. So please get out there and support that, support the real world events as they try to get back on their feet after missing a year last year because of the pandemic. It's very exciting racing. And it's very sociable racing as well, because you can stop and have a chat in between those sections, speak to your fellow riders and not be worrying about the clock ticking away whilst you're sat having a drink. And as a reminder of the raffle prizes that are on offer to our championship entries today. So they're being provided by Hyper Ice and the Garda Bike Hotel. So thanks a lot to those guys for putting up those prizes. Nice little reward for all of the riders who have put in the effort today. That's that amazing effort, over an hour and a half of riding for the quickest, and we'll be approaching 2 hours or so for the other riders. So they've got a chance of winning one of these prizes. And if you do win one of those, then please send a tweet or post it on Facebook and show off your brand new prize. And if you are off to the Garda Bike Hotel, then yeah, that's fantastic. Have a great time. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you've enjoyed the broadcast and this exciting format, and look out for it on the platform and enjoy racing in one of the Gran Fondos if you are taking part later this summer. Thank you very much, everyone, and catch you again next time.